Effort works, especially early in life. That's not a cultural illusion. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a real, lived truth. For most people, effort is the first reliable way the system learns how to move through the world. You try harder, you study longer, you push a little more, and something happens. You get results. You receive feedback. Doors open. Problems resolve. Effort doesn't just produce outcomes. At a nervous system level, it produces orientation. The system learns, when I apply myself, things respond. That response builds agency. It creates coherence. It reduces uncertainty. Effort becomes associated not just with success, but with safety. That's why effort becomes a primary organizing principle. Not because people are conditioned to overwork, but because effort works. When life is uncertain, effort offers structure. When attention is scattered, effort focuses it. When fear is present, effort gives the body something to do. Movement reduces ambiguity. Action narrows the field. Over time, competence builds on top of this. Results reinforce the pattern. Praise reinforces it. Sometimes, survival depends on it. Slowly, effort stops being a strategy and becomes an identity. Effort isn't just a mental decision. It's a physiological state. It mobilizes energy, sharpens focus, increases output by increasing tension, just enough to move forward. Early on, the body can hold that tension. The system has room. Capacity hasn't been tested yet. The costs are low. The returns are high. Effort feels clean, purposeful, even empowered. So when effort later starts to feel strained, confusion runs deep. Because the memory is real. Effort did work. It solved real problems. It kept things together. That history matters. Effort wasn't just about achievement. It was about orientation. And when that's been true for long enough, trying harder doesn't feel optional. It feels necessary. Not as a belief, but as a bodily expectation. This is where the story actually begins.
At some point, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once. Quietly. Effort is still applied. Motivation is still present. Intelligence hasn't diminished. In fact, insight often increases. You know more than you did before. You care just as much, sometimes more. And yet, the return begins to change. This is the moment most people miss. Because the system hasn't failed. It has reached a limit. Every nervous system has a capacity range, a window within which mobilization is sustainable. That range grows, but it grows slowly. Much more slowly than ambition, responsibility, or opportunity, especially for people who are competent, driven, or relied upon. Capacity isn't a matter of will. It isn't increased by understanding, and it isn't overridden by intention. It's physiological. For a long time, effort stayed within that window. The system could mobilize, recover, and mobilize again without consequence. Stress resolved, tension discharged. There was space between pushes for the body to reset. But as life accumulates, more complexity, more demands, more internal pressure, the baseline changes. The system begins operating closer to its upper edge, still functioning, still producing, but with less margin. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. From the inside, something starts to feel tight. Effort now draws from reserves instead of surplus. Recovery takes longer. The same level of push costs more. The nervous system compensates, staying activated longer, reducing sensitivity, narrowing focus. This is where capacity is mistaken for motivation. Energy dips, and it's framed as lack of desire. Friction appears, and it's framed as lack of discipline. Exhaustion creeps in, and it's framed as weakness. But what's actually happening is simpler and harder to see. The system is full, not emotionally, not mentally, physiologically. The body is still doing what it knows how to do, mobilize in response to demand. But it no longer has the elasticity to absorb repeated strain without cost. The window hasn't disappeared. It has narrowed. This is why rest doesn't always restore things anymore. Why weekends don't reset the system. Why insight doesn't translate into relief. The ceiling isn't conceptual. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, stop here. It shows up indirectly as subtle resistance, reduced responsiveness, or a sense that forward motion requires disproportionate effort. And because effort has worked for so long, the reflex is to apply more of it. But effort applied beyond capacity doesn't create progress. It creates pressure. This isn't a personal limitation. It's a biological one. Recognizing the threshold doesn't solve anything yet, but it does orient you correctly, because what follows isn't a lack of ability. It's the appearance of friction.
When capacity is exceeded, the system doesn't stop functioning. It changes how it functions. From the outside, this can be deeply confusing. The same actions are taken. The same effort is applied. Sometimes there's even more skill, more awareness, more refinement. And yet, forward movement that once felt clean now feels resisted. This is where friction appears. Friction isn't dramatic failure. It's subtle opposition. Things take longer. Simple tasks require disproportionate energy. Decisions that were once straightforward feel heavy. The system begins to hesitate, not because it's unsure, but because it's bracing. Internally, this is often misread as loss of motivation, as loss of clarity. But those interpretations come from the mind trying to explain a physiological signal. The body isn't refusing, it's protecting. When effort exceeds capacity, tension no longer discharges fully. It accumulates. The nervous system stays partially activated, even at rest. There's less true settling between pushes, which means each new demand lands on a system that hasn't reset. This is how effort begins to produce drag instead of momentum. Energy is still moving, but against internal resistance. The system is working harder not to collapse, withdraw, or overwhelm. That protective work isn't visible from the outside, but it consumes resources. As a result, progress starts to feel like strain. This is where many people double down. They tighten structure, increase discipline, optimize routines. For a while, that can keep things moving, but only by narrowing the system's margin even further. The friction intensifies not because effort is wrong, but because it's no longer matched to capacity. You may notice irritability where there used to be focus, procrastination where there used to be flow, a sense of internal pressure without a clear source. Even success can start to feel strangely unsatisfying, not because it lacks meaning, but because the system is too taxed to register it as safe. This isn't burnout in the dramatic sense. There may be no crisis, no breakdown, no obvious stopping point, just a growing sense that forward motion feels costly. That cost is the signal. Friction is feedback, not psychological feedback, physiological feedback. The body is communicating that the mode of engagement hasn't updated, even though conditions have. What once organized the system is now overloading it. What once created coherence is now creating compression. And because effort has long been associated with competence, slowing down can feel like regression. Pausing can feel dangerous. Letting off can feel irresponsible, even when the strain is obvious. So the system stays in motion, but without ease. This is the turning point most people misinterpret. They look for better strategies, sharper focus, stronger will. But the friction isn't pointing to a lack of effort. It's pointing to a mismatch. Not yet a problem to fix, just a reality to see. Because once friction appears, pushing doesn't restore progress. It confirms the ceiling. An understanding that changes how the entire situation is held.
At this point, the instinct is to ask what to do next. How to fix it. How to get back to momentum. But that question comes too early. Before change. Before adjustment. Before any attempt to intervene, something more foundational is required. Accurate orientation. Not reassurance. Not motivation. Just clarity about what's actually happening. When effort stops working, most people assume something has gone wrong. They look for errors in discipline, mindset, values, desire. They scan for personal flaws. They search for better systems. And that search often deepens the strain. Accurate orientation doesn't try to resolve the situation. It simply names it. Effort has reached its effective limit. Not as a failure, but as a fact. The system isn't broken. It's responding exactly as nervous systems do when mobilization exceeds capacity. Seeing this matters. Without that recognition, every signal gets misinterpreted. Fatigue becomes weakness. Resistance becomes self-sabotage. Friction becomes an enemy instead of information. The body's communication is overwritten by explanation. Orientation interrupts that loop. It allows a different internal stance, not one of correction, but of comprehension. The system isn't asking for more effort, or less effort, or rest, or persistence. It isn't asking anything at all. It's signaling, and signals don't require answers. They require accuracy. When orientation is correct, something subtle happens. The pressure to fix begins to soften, not because the situation is resolved, but because it's no longer being fought. The body doesn't have to argue with the mind. The system isn't forced to justify its limits. This doesn't create relief yet. It creates space. Space to stop escalating. Space to stop self-interpreting. Space to stop confusing capacity with character. That space can feel uncomfortable at first. Without the familiar structure of trying harder, the system may feel unmoored. Effort has organized things for so long that not reaching for it immediately can feel like standing still without ground. But this pause isn't passivity. It's recognition. Recognition that effort did its job. Recognition that the ceiling is real. Recognition that friction is information, not failure. Nothing needs to be solved in this moment. And that isn't avoidance, it's precision. Premature solutions often lock the system into the very pattern that's no longer working. Orientation comes first. It allows the nervous system to register that the struggle isn't against life, it's with an outdated mode of engagement. And that shift, even without action, changes how the experience is held. The body stops being treated as an obstacle. Effort stops being treated as a virtue or a vice. The moment becomes intelligible instead of adversarial. This is where the cycle turns. Not forward yet, not outward, inward, in the simplest sense. Toward what's true now, not what used to work. No advice is needed here. No strategy belongs here. Only accurate seeing. Because once reality is recognized clearly, it no longer has to shout through friction. Something else becomes possible later. But this is not that moment. This moment is about seeing where you actually are.